Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Good afternoon, Dan Proft, and joining me this week for this edition of Illinois Rising is John Tillman. He's the president and CEO of Illinois Policy Institute, of course, illinoispolicy.org. And John, next year, and another important Supreme Court case that involves unionization that could directly impact the state of affairs in Illinois. Last year it was Harris v. Quinn with respect to home health care workers. This year, it's a case called Fredericks versus California Teachers Association. Give us a little bit of backstory on this.
Well, Rebecca Fredericks is a courageous teacher in California who did not feel she wanted to be forced unionized into a union that had maybe perhaps different political views than her own. And that's really the crux of this issue is, can a union, does it have superior rights over an individual citizen's rights to force people into union where they then take money in your union dues and spend it on politics, whether you agree with those politics or not? Rebecca's taken this case to the Supreme Court to try to set workers free. And
that courageous teacher named Rebecca Fredericks joins us now. Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me this morning.
So kind of walk us through what led you, not even all the way to the Supreme Court, which I'm sure is an interesting tale, but just even at the initial phase, what led you to say kind of no more with respect to the teachers union there?
Well, that's a really long story. It started when I was a student teacher, when I witnessed a tenured teacher who was being quite abusive with her little first graders. She'd grab them and yank them and yell right in their faces, and I had a real problem with that. And when I asked my master teacher about what was going on, she sat me down and she talked to me about teachers' unions and how it was difficult for school districts to do what was right for children because of these tenure laws and this grievance process that really binds the hands of administrators. And then I became a teacher, and almost every time I turned around, I ran into this union that I was forced to fund, and I'm still forced to fund, that was actually standing against every education reform that I believed in. They were everything that I thought was great for my students and wonderful for education in America, they were standing against it.
Rebecca, this is John. Tell us a little bit, let's expand on that, because I think when I talk about this issue with people who love public schools, want to see their schools be excellent, oftentimes in nicer neighborhoods you have very, relatively speaking, good public schools. They just don't understand this. Why would the union stand in the way of innovation reform, and in particular, as you referenced, accountability of teachers who are failing the children? What is it about unionization in the public sector, particularly teachers, that drives this kind of dysfunction?
Right. You know, this is very hard to understand and very frustrating for teachers. My opinion on this is many, many years ago, at the turn of the 19th century, you know, the unions were doing wonderful things. They were supporting their members. Well, something's gotten lost. What's happened is accountability has been lost. Union says it speaks on behalf of all teachers, but in reality what's going on is the union speaks on behalf of itself. Because of this automatic dues-paying regime, union leaders are not accountable to teachers. So frequently, they take positions that further the interests of the union leadership, but do not reflect the views of the teachers or the children. Well, they don't represent children, but they say they do. So they're not representing what's best for kids and teachers. The way I see it is the unions have become what they used to fight.
That's interesting. Interesting. Yeah, Rebecca, I wonder if you think part of this is, you know, you get into this adversarial posture, the unions versus the school board versus the school district, the typical kind of labor management relationship, and teachers who maybe even share the view that you share, that you've just shared with us so far, say, yeah, I agree, but I'm just focused on getting what we deserve from management. And so, it all gets lost in this kind of competition between management and labor to see who one-ups the other, rather than kind of remembering that schools are supposed to be child-centered and outcome-focused.
Yeah, what a shame. That just breaks my heart, because teachers are public servants. And we are there for the children, and we are there to serve the taxpayers who are paying us to do a great job to protect children. So, yeah, it's really a shame.
I think that's one of the sad things, Rebecca, about this whole unionization of public workers in general, and in particular teachers. It's the deprofessionalization of the craft. Teachers change children's lives for the better. Great teachers do this especially well. And meanwhile, the poor teachers who cannot be held accountable by administrators for failing the children are left in front of classrooms, 20 or 25 kids every year, class after class, generation after generation. And this is what I think is so shameful about the whole thing. If you love teaching and love helping children rise and learn, you should really want to set the teachers free so that they can choose where they work and that they can be rewarded if they're exceptional. And frankly, those who are not and shouldn't be teaching are moved on to other professions.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you 100%. And, you just painted the perfect example of why our case is not really about politics. Our case is about collective bargaining is just as political as anything else the union does. Because when unions negotiate with local officials over the best use of tax dollars, that's political. And what you just described is what I call the union 1-2 punch. They go in with their political monies and they pass laws like tenure. So now these teachers have what have morphed into permanent positions. It's very difficult to let go of a tenured teacher. But then the unions use their collective bargaining monies to bring in these grievance procedures. So if an administrator has a teacher who's tenured, who doesn't belong in the classroom anymore, that administrator's hands are tied, because the administrator can't let the teacher go, but then the administrator tries to discipline the teacher and runs into the grievance procedures.
We're talking to Roberta Friedrich. She's a California teacher who's the plaintiff in the case, Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association, trying to free herself from the forced unionization in the school in which she works. And it's interesting, you talk about that too, what essentially leads to the infamous now rubber rooms in New York, right? We can't get rid of them, but we know we don't want them in front of a classroom because they're bad teachers. And we know, and everybody knows from the research, that a bad teacher can result in stunting a child's intellectual development by a grade, maybe as much as 2 grades. And educators are steeped in the artistry of teaching, know this, and it seems to me that one of the other problems the unions present is kind of suppressing people from saying what they know to be true for fear of reprisal.
You are exactly right. As you were describing that, I was thinking of all the teachers I know who are so frustrated by the issues you just described. We're there for the kids, and we want to do what's right for the kids. And we are in this truly tyrannical regime where we are forced to pay these fees to an entity that literally, in many of our cases, the union that we're forced to fund is in direct opposition to our own core values. So they take their core values, which impact every political decision they make, every collective bargaining stance they take, and no matter where our fees are directed towards overt politics or collective bargaining, they're used to promote the union's political agenda, the union's core values, not the core values of the teachers that are funding this whole thing.
And remember, if this was reversed, Rebecca, and if this was an employer who was forcing an employee, confiscating money from their paycheck to spend it on politics that the employer decides is correct against the employee's wishes, the world would be outraged. But somehow, because this is disguised under unionization, it seems to be okay with certain people in the punditry class, the media, and the allies of the unions.
Right, that's right. And, they even go a step further. They call people like me a free rider for being upset about having to fund this, what I see as an immoral proposition. And, I've never once asked the unions to represent me. They're the ones who asked for these monopoly bargaining laws that give them the authority to negotiate on behalf of everyone. And then they take my money. For people like myself who are fee payers, We pay 100% of their collective bargaining fees, which are about $650 a year for a full-time teacher in my district. But we have no vote in collective bargaining, no voice. So we pay 100% of those fees. We have no vote and no voice. So the reality is I'm a forced writer, and they're free riding off of me and teachers like me, and they've been doing this for decades.
And boy, that is well said. And I think one of the interesting things, Dan, is even in Illinois, how insidious the power of the unions are with the amicus brief on this case.
Yeah, Rebecca Friedrichs, thanks so much for joining us. California teacher Rebecca Friedrichs, the plaintiff in the case, Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association, which will be adjudicated by the Supreme Court next summer. Rebecca, good luck. We'll be watching.
Thank you, gentlemen. It was great to be here today.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And John, to that point, we should mention this because you had the kind of incredible development, and maybe this will help our listeners understand why Republicans are in the super minority in the General Assembly in Illinois. You had 2, 4, 6, 8 incumbent legislative Republicans in the state of Illinois file amicus briefs in this case on behalf of the California Teachers Association, the union.
Right. And first of all, an out-of-state union, and secondly, a union that is harming the education of children in Illinois. I think it's amazing. It's Representative Adam Brown, who's now retiring, Terry Bryant, C.D. Davidsmeyer, Bill Mitchell, Sam McCann in the Senate, Noreen Hammond, Dwight Kane, Raymond Poe. All those names should be mentioned and noted for their support of the unions trying to hurt the education of children, and also not allowing a teacher like Rebecca Friedrichs and all those teachers like her here who simply want to live their lives and change children's lives for the better. And
one of the things that this points out, too, for those names people may not be familiar with, these are largely downstate Republicans, and this is the challenge to get school reform, whether it's in Chicago or the suburbs or the Quad Cities or East St. Louis or Springfield, for that matter. Republicans in the state who are beholden to the unions, the public sector unions, like the teachers union, and thus end up, frankly, doing the bidding of the Chicago Democrat power structure.
That's right. And pretty much the way I think you should, and of course this is a personal opinion, but as all my opinions are on the show, but
yes.
I think that if you're a voter, a donor to politicians, any politician who takes teachers union money and public sector union money should be toxic, and perhaps you should consider supporting someone else.